on the hospital bed, ripping the skin from the side of my nails off as I waited for the examination to be over. It wasn't exactly the most comfortable thing I'd experienced in my life. I just wanted to know what was wrong with me. Suddenly, I heard a gasp, and then a thumping sound like a body hitting the floor. I couldn't move because there was a camera in my ear, but I managed to look over the side of the bed to see that it was indeed a body that had hit the floor. The sweet nurse who had brought me water and made sure I was okay was clearly not okay herself. She was lying on the floor, passed out. I looked at the doctor and she looked like she'd seen a ghost. She was as pale as the nurse and was gripping onto the bed. She pressed the emergency alarm button, and that's when the panic really hit me. Was this an emergency because of the nurse who'd just fainted? Or was it because of me? I waited a long time before finally giving in and booking a doctor's appointment. I don't know if you realize what it's like to wake up every day with a headache, which as the day goes on just gets progressively worse and worse. I couldn't take it anymore. Sometimes it was so bad it felt like something was living inside my head, and there were even some strange sounds that I'd constantly hear, like a rustling sound. On the day of our final SAT exams, I sat in the hall trying to figure out a math equation. The pain was so bad it actually felt like the big clock on the wall was ticking like a time bomb inside my brain. I took headache tablets every day to try and get rid of the pain, but I didn't have any on me. They weren't allowed in the exam hall. That day was probably the most pain I'd ever been in, but there was nothing I could do. It was the final exam, so I could hardly just walk out. Up until that point, the headaches had been accompanied by this weird crawling feeling in my left ear. I kept thinking it was water, and I'd tilt my head every time I came out of the shower and try to empty out any leftover water. But the feeling remained. It was pretty itchy, and it was always worse whenever I moved. If I stood still or laid down, it wouldn't feel so strange. That's why I assumed it was water or wax. But the headaches? Believe me, you've never felt anything like it. And that day was the worst one yet. I decided I had to leave the hall because it was either that or I'd throw up everywhere, and I would never live that down. I got up to leave, and I could just make out the door in the distance, but I never reached it. I must have blacked out because the next thing I knew, I was sitting in the nurse's room, and she was telling me that I really needed to get help. She was no stranger to my headaches. I was probably her most frequent patient, and she even offered to help me contact a specialist about it. I told her it was fine, and I'd get my mom to make the call for me. I stayed there in the nurse's room for the next few hours, but I knew deep down I had to do something. I couldn't live like this anymore. It wasn't normal, but I was scared. I'm scared that the doctor would tell me I had a brain tumor or some rare disease. That night, I couldn't get the nurse's voice out of my head. I realized it was only going to get worse if I didn't seek proper medical help. So that's how I found myself lying on the bed in the hospital with an ear, nose, and throat specialist staring in shock at what she saw on the screen, and a nurse passed out next to me. Doctor, what's going on? I managed to say in a quiet voice. She stared at me, shock and fear written all across her face. Nothing, and I mean nothing, could prepare me for what she told me next. She looked at me and tried to smile in a professional manner. Then she told me what was wrong with me. There was a spider living inside my ear. Now, I'm not one of those people who has a major phobia of spiders or anything, but this news hit me like a ton of bricks. A spider was living in my ear. I probably would have thought the doctor was joking if it weren't for the fact that the nurse had properly passed out from shock. At that exact moment, a few other doctors and nurses came running into the room, and one of the nurses actually ran straight back out as soon as she saw what was on the screen. She actually screamed. Like, seriously, what was wrong with these people? They weren't even the ones with the spider in their ear. Ah, get it out! I screamed. Get it out right now, please! I couldn't even move because the camera was still in my ear, but I didn't care. I yanked it out and slid off the bed. I wanted to get out of there. I don't know what came over me, but I started shaking my head frantically as if I could somehow get the spider out myself. The doctor who examined me took me into her arms and asked me to sit down. She said they would get it out right away, but I'd need to lie back down as it was stuck deep down in my ear canal, and they needed to use special tools to remove it. I was literally squirming in disgust. How had this even happened? The other two doctors looked as disgusted as I was, and the nurse who'd fainted was now swaying as she left the room. She didn't even ask if I was okay. I was guessing that this kind of thing didn't happen much around here. As I tried to lie still while they got their tools ready, I thought about when this might have happened. The headaches had started about 2.5 years ago, and I'd been hearing these weird sounds at first when the headaches started, almost as if there was something in there moving around. I tried everything to get rid of it, but still I heard these sounds, and the headaches always came because of this itchy sensation in my ear. The more I poked at my ear, the worse it got. Eventually, I just started leaving it alone and taking extra-strength painkillers. Anyway, if I could pinpoint the exact time it all started, it was at the end of the summer, just after a school camping trip. After middle school and before going to high school, we went on this big camping trip together to bond with our new classmates. It was such an awesome trip, and we even got to camp outside in nature. And then it hit me. The camping outside. That must have been when it happened. But surely a spider couldn't live that long inside someone's ear. I mean, sure, it's cool and damp in there, but I'm surprised it hadn't drowned by now. The number of times I tried to get rid of that feeling with a syringe full of water. Now to think that this whole time the sounds I'd been hearing and that weird creeping sensation was because an actual real-life spider was living inside my ear. If the doctors hadn't held me down until they got it out, I doubt I'd have been able to stomach it. It felt like there were spiders crawling around inside every part of my body. What if it had laid eggs and now I had baby spiders living in my brain? Ooh, even just thinking that made me start to cry. I don't cry much, but I couldn't hold back the tears. I just couldn't believe this was happening to me, and I hadn't even realized. How could I have been so stupid to think it was just earwax or water causing all this pain and discomfort? After about 10 minutes of prodding, which seriously felt like the longest 10 minutes of my life, the doctor finally got it out. I managed to catch a glimpse of it before they disposed of it, and I am being deadly serious when I say this thing was huge. Like, not a teeny weeny spider. It was brown and... No, I can't even talk about it again without feeling sick. The doctors looked horrified. Before I could sit up, though, they said they had to clean my ear out with a special solution just to make sure they got the rest of the web out. Web? Ugh. And then they told me. The good news was the spider was actually dead. The bad news, the spider was in fact a venomous brown recluse spider and had spun a web inside my ear. I started shaking. This was absolutely disgusting! Not only had a spider crawled into my ear and lived there for more than 2 years, it had also spun a web inside. Yeah, okay, spider, come on in and make yourself at home, why don't you? The solution they wanted to pour into my ear would make sure no remaining web or spider eggs were left in there. I was traumatized. They got the rest of the web out and predicted that the spider had probably died after about a year due to lack of food and water, but that it was buried so deep in my ear canal, which was why I'd been getting headaches. They assured me there would be no lasting damage, and that I was lucky. Not only lucky that there was no damage, but lucky to be alive, because this was one of the 3 deadliest spiders living in the USA, and the chances of this happening were like 1 in a million. Great, I thought, and it happened to me. I hadn't even told my parents about this appointment, or anyone for that matter. Now what? I was alive, but I knew I wasn't okay. I mean, how can you be okay after something like this? I could have died. What if it had bitten me? I was glad it had died when it did. I don't wish death upon anyone or anything, but seriously, if it hadn't gotten stuck in its own web, it probably would have crawled into my brain and bitten me. Even telling you this story is bringing back horrible memories, but my psychologist told me it would help if I spoke about it. Yep, that's right, I'm getting therapy now. I wish I could say they removed the spider and life went back to normal, but I'd be lying. Okay, so the headaches disappeared, but then I started having nightmares, and even today I still have to sleep with earplugs in for fear of another spider crawling in there again. My psychologist says this will eventually stop, but I can still hear that rustling sound, and anytime I feel a slight pain in my head, it brings back all those memories of my pounding headaches. If I could tell you anything, it would be that you don't need to worry. The chances of this happening to you are extremely rare, but also, please don't ignore any pain you get for as long as I did. It's always better just to check it out and make sure it's nothing serious. Oh yeah, and maybe don't camp outside without a tent, just to be on the safe side. What do you think of my story? Pretty disgusting, right?
Hi, My name's Allison, and when I was just 5 years old, my mom passed away. For years, it was just me and my dad. We would go on adventures every weekend together, hiking in the nearby mountains, camping in the forest, reading books together in our backyard. We were like best friends. But then one day, everything changed. My dad met Sylvia. Pretty soon after, Sylvia and her daughter Elsie moved in, and we became one big happy family. Not. I mean, okay, when my dad asked me how I felt about it all, I just smiled and said, "I'm happy if you are." I don't normally tell lies, but he really did look so happy, and I didn't want to hurt his feelings. Even when he asked her to marry him, I baked a cake to celebrate and tried my hardest to be okay with it. It wasn't so bad when they first moved in. Dad is a bit messy, so it was nice to have some other females around the house to help out a bit. And Sylvia is super organized, so she really took control and did the house up. It looked great. But then it started to get a bit much. Elsie complained that my room was bigger than hers, so Dad agreed to break down my wall, making my room smaller than hers. I tried to tell him that wasn't fair. It was my house first. But Dad just said we need to keep everyone happy. Dad works at the university, and sometimes he has to work late. I don't know when it started, but one day, Sylvia just began treating me differently. On the nights Dad was at work, she'd say it was my turn to cook, and she always made me help Elsie with her homework, saying that I was lucky to be so smart and that I should share my smartness with my sister. I started to dread nights alone with them, as they had already started to gang up on me. One night, I was in the bath, and I heard them laughing nearby. I quickly dried off and tiptoed out into the hall. I could see them through the crack in the door of my dad's study. They were looking at old photos of my mom and saying she was ugly, and what had my dad been thinking when he had married someone like that? Elsie kept saying how much more beautiful Sylvia was than my mom. I couldn't bear hearing this. And then I heard Sylvia saying that she had taken $400 from my dad to buy a new handbag, but she didn't even tell him. I was getting more annoyed. My dad wasn't doing that well financially, and we don't usually buy expensive clothes or bags. The next thing I heard was glass smashing. I ran into the study, almost dropping my towel on the way. When they saw me, they quickly jumped up and said they'd heard a crash and come running in. On the floor was the framed photo of my mom and dad on their wedding day, and one of us as a family of 3. The glass was smashed and the photos were slightly creased. They were lying to me. They had knocked them off the shelf. I looked at them both with tears in my eyes and ran to my room. As soon as my dad got home, I told them everything they'd said and done. Dad didn't believe me at all and said accidents happen and that Sylvia would never be so cruel to say something like that about Mom. He kept saying how Sylvia loves me and thinks the world of me. The next few weeks just got worse. They started teasing me about my skin. I'd recently got a few pimples, and I felt so self-conscious about them. Elsie even said that I'm dirty, and that's why I have so many pimples and no date for the school dance. That day, it happened to be my dad's birthday, so I was making his favorite meal. While I was cooking, Sylvia started shouting at me to clean up her toenails that she'd just cut. They were all over the floor. And then she said I needed to hurry up so I could write Elsie's history paper for tomorrow. I said I was busy and couldn't Elsie do it by herself? Then she started screaming at me so much that she actually threw her cup of boiling hot tea at me. I crouched onto the floor, and thankfully it missed me by an inch. I was still shocked when she started shouting at me louder and saying she doesn't understand why I'm in her life and that she doesn't even love my father anymore. At that exact moment, my dad walked through the door. He saw me cowering by the stove and Sylvia marching towards me with her arms raised. He looked straight at Sylvia and said at the top of his voice, "Stop!" Turns out, he'd come home early to surprise us for his birthday. And when he'd heard Sylvia bossing me around, he'd hid around the door listening. Sylvia burst into tears and said she didn't mean it, she was having a bad day, and it was just a big misunderstanding. Before she could even finish, my dad came towards me and gave me a huge hug. He apologized to me for not believing me. And then he turned to Sylvia. He ordered her to pack her and Elsie's stuff and get out of his house immediately. She was hysterical by then and was begging to stay. But my dad said he was done. He would be filing the divorce papers as soon as possible. Then he turned back to me, gave me a kiss on my head, and said this was turning out to be the best birthday he'd had in years. Finally, it was just me and my dad again.